1, 0.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the Beach and Beyond Literati book discussion. Today, my August pick was There's Word for That by Sloane Tanen, and it is my enormous pleasure to bring you a conversation, 30 minutes, with the author Sloane Tanen. And Sloane, we don't know each other.
We don't. This was such an honor and an incredible invitation. I was so excited. I'm a fan. It was great. And all my friends are like, Elin, that's incredible. So thank you. It was so great.
You're so welcome. It's so funny. I get sent a lot of books. I probably get 3 to 4 books a week in the mail. And I feel like my publicist sent me this last summer and it sat on my pile. You and I have the same publisher, and we have the same publicist. And so my publicist did it last summer, and it sat on my pile. I'm like, okay, when am I ever going to read this? And then I transferred it from my pile to my shelf. And at some point, like earlier this summer, I'm like, I need a pick for my book group. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I wonder if this is any good. And I started reading it. I'm like, oh my goodness, this not only is this book so wonderful, but it is such a perfect match for my book group, which is The Beach and Beyond, because it is a beachy-ish book, that it's very engaging, funny, and has its light moments, but it's also beyond because it is, has some serious things to say about family and about sobriety and about, healing and reckoning with our past. And so I guess what we'll do, Sloane, why don't we start by you describing There's a Word for That.
Okay.
What happens? We all know, everybody on this Zoom knows what happens, but we want to hear it in your own words.
Okay. Well, I really wanted to, you want me to tell you the plot of it kind of?
Well, how you came about to writing it. And yes, you can talk about the plot, and it's okay. Because everyone's finished.
Okay. Well, I really wanted to write a book. I would say, I don't know, 10 years ago, my agent sent me a copy of Jonathan Tropper's novel, This Is Where I Leave You. Did you guys all read that? And she was like, you should write a book like this. That was her sort of recommendation. I was like, well, that sounds easy, but hard, impossible. How do you do that, right? And then I thought, well, the novels I like are family dysfunction. I love a comic novel, and I think it's hard to find a good comic novel. It's always a little tricky. So I really wanted to try to do that if it was possible. And I love the idea of these sort of archetypes and people we assume that we know about and have an idea about, and kind of unraveling that and seeing what that looks like underneath. And I happen to like unlikable characters, or at least characters who initially seem like they're unlikable, and seeing if there's anything, underneath that to find, to dig into. So I grew up in LA, and rehab was just sort of a part of my life growing up. I had family going in and out of rehab. I had friends going in and out of rehab. And then I moved to New York in the 90s to go to school. And, the cycle kind of continued. And I thought, okay, how do I bring all of these things together into a story and get all the characters, that conflict, how to get all the characters in one place at one time. And I thought, it'd be kind of funny. I had an uncle who was a mess, drug-wise, and how to get him and say a mother figure into the same space and have the family kind of confront one another. Kind of like Chopper did with the parent dying and having a Shiva and having the family. I love that, just a conceit I've always liked. So I thought, let's do it at a high-end rehab. And some of the people I knew were actually in a very kind of fancy rehab, which, I don't know how well any of those work in my experience, not that well, but they're sort of these spa experiences people have. And I don't know, but it was a disaster from my end as an audience member watching what happened in these rehabs. And I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit, and the idea of addiction and what we kind of assume about addiction and the sort of truth behind it. And, heroin in particular was such an interesting drug for me, because I think we have a lot of assumptions about what a heroin addict is. And I think that's often very different, what you end up, what that looks like in real life versus what we perceive that to be from a distance. So those were all things I wanted to explore. And sisters and jealousy and inheritance. I kind of just wanted to throw it all into the pot and see what cooked and came out. So that was sort
right. Yeah, you did such a good job. One of the things I love, and that I feel like a lot of the readers for my Literati group love, is the multiple point of view, and it's something that I employ in my books. And in my comments on the Literati app, people were asking. I guess they felt like there were a couple of points of view that were left out. I also do that. You literally cannot hear from everybody. And in fact, when I'm writing, I will often count. I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I up to now? Because the more points of view you get, it's a lot of readers have a hard time keeping track. So and every voice needs to sort of ring true. So how did you decide whose voices you were going to include in this and whose you were going to leave out?
I don't know that it was an academic decision as much as whose voice I felt like I could inhabit in a way that seemed authentic. Who could I connect? Like, I actually initially wanted to tell the book. The book was initially told from a Hispanic housekeeper. And she was in a coma. Maria, who's a peripheral character in the book. That was how the whole book started. And she was sort of the narrator of this book about this sort of family saga. And then, rightly so, I started getting into issues of like appropriation. How do you appropriate first person voice? It seemed like I was going to get in too deep for myself. So I peeled that back and started splitting up the voices. And then I thought, I'm going to tell it from Gail's point of view. So that was where I initially wanted to go with it. And then I felt like I'm so not like that. Like, I'm just not a mercenary person at all. And I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't do it in a way that felt authentic. Either I'm not a good enough writer or I'm not evil enough. I don't know what it was, but I couldn't do it. So then I thought, okay, let's start with Janine. And that was really easy to do. That was sort of no problem. And then Marty was no problem. Sometimes it's just an organic flow, right? I don't know how you feel in your books. Is it the same thing? There's some characters you almost can't do. And I thought Henry was going to be a problem, but he wasn't. He was so fun to write. And the other thing was, initially half of the characters were in the first person and the rest were in the third. And I really liked that. Through the editing process, that got peeled back and it all went into third person. But for me, that was a really fun way to inhabit a character. Like, doing the male character from the first person was so great for me. And I loved it that way. But it had to, things get undone in editing, as you know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I prefer, regardless of what book it is, I prefer a third person narrator. I actually feel like you can get deeper. This is like a big bone of contention, I think, among not only authors, but readers. You can actually get deeper in the third person, because you are not, when you're in a first person narrative, you're inhabited by your own telling of the story.
Right.
When you're doing it third person, you're really taking an authorial stance, and you can get deeper into characters in the third person. And I far, far, far prefer. When I was at Iowa, the professors there were very anti first person narratives. Right. And I picked up that prejudice there. And I thought, yeah, you're right. I'm reading a book that's written in the first person now. I do like it. I mean, there are ways of doing it well, but I really appreciated that this was told throughout the third person.
That's interesting. I thought, like, if you're doing a psychopath, like with Gail, I wanted it to be first, because then you want her prejudice to run the story. And there's something about first where you can take the audience along and they're kind of with you. Right? If they're in your head, they're seeing and the minute you're in the third, then you're having to put a judgment on it on some level. That's what it's, you're right. I know you're right from an artistic point of view, but in my mind, I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to do this. But then I read Talented Mr. Ripley again, and I was like, oh, he did this in the third person, and it's like one of my favorite books. I'm going to reread.
I'm actually going to reread that, because that is a book that interests me a lot. But I want to say Gail. Okay, so Gail was one of my favorite characters, not her per se, but her storyline. The fact that she sort of was preying on Marty, and like all the conversations between Marty and, I don't know, was it his accountant or his attorney? And I'm like, this is such gold. It was so well done. And Marty is just like, just give her whatever she wants. I don't care. Meanwhile, he's like literally bankrupting himself. And I'm like, Marty, like, what are you doing? Like, this is your inheritance. And I was freaking out. And I also really loved, this is something else I've done in my books, the relationship between Marty and Bunny. So basically they were married a million years ago, and they've basically forgotten about each other, because if you don't have children with someone and you're married to someone, you can actually just move on, like breaking up with the boyfriend, and you never see them again. So I was really charmed by the fact that he's like, oh, we were married. And then going back in their memory, like, and what was that like? In my Winter Street, my Christmas series, I have an ex-wife and a ex-husband who rekindle their relationship. And I mean, it's sweet, honestly, because a lot of times it's just timing and circumstances, the reasons things don't work out.
And sometimes that connection is still there, right, with somebody, and it bridges time, right? You go back to that time when you were together and you were like attracted to that person and you had this connection with this person. And then, I don't know, life is so long, right? We move on. I mean, I've been married to the same person for 20 years, so I haven't personally had that experience, but you meet an old boyfriend or you see someone or have a conversation and you're like, oh, I remember you, right? I remember me with you, right?
Yeah, I really, really loved that part of it. The other part I really liked, and I feel like that readers really sort of attached to, is there are three generations. Okay, so we have Marty, Bunny, right, and then you have sort of Henry and Janine, and what's the sister's name? Is the sister Amanda?
Amanda.
No, Amanda is the sister, right? And then the girls, Haley, and you're going to help me, JC and Haley. Yeah. Okay. And I love any book that adult book that incorporates sort of teenagers into it, because I just feel like it adds this sort of 2021 energy to it, like, or a 2020s energy of like, because kids, I mean, I have 3, 21, 19 and 15, and their vocabulary is different. Their mindset is different. And I really appreciated having that included. That was obviously intentional.
Yeah.
And do you have your research to research the young people?
I wrote a young adult book a while ago. And I don't know, I love teenagers. I just love them. I have boys and I'm always like, where's my girl? Like, I didn't get that, but it does have a certain energy. I think teenagers I think they're a little tricky to write, because you got to get it right, or it's just so bad, but there is an immediacy to their emotional life that adults don't have, or at least adults spend a lot of effort trying to suppress. So they're fun to write because it's just like, it's like id on the loose, right? They're just kind of going for it. So I always like to have a teenager or somebody young, and I liked, I really like old people and teenagers. The middle is always a little bit hard. Right.
Well, because that's where we're sitting. We're sitting in the middle.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. So the thing about the teenagers, and so it was easy. It was easier to write teenagers until like 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And then when like 2012, 2013, when sort of social media started happening in a big way. So if let's say 2013, that was 8 years ago, someone who's 15, that's half their life. Right? So my daughter is raised by social media, and she knows nothing else. And the way that they talk. So I feel like it was easier to write about teenagers even 10 years ago than it is.
It is hard. And then if you get things wrong, it's so clear, and things change so quickly that it ends up being dated. I mean, even writing a text message, like, is that going to be the technology in 10 years? Everything, it just dates you. So I don't know. The new book I'm doing is like set in the 80s, and that just spared me having to deal. I think a lot of writers are doing that now, right? They're just setting things back to simplify.
Right. So funny. Okay. So I want to go back. I want to talk about how you started writing, how you got the book published. Just give us your origin story.
I started writing this. This book took me a surprisingly long time to write, considering, so it was 800 pages when I finished this book.
Oh my goodness.
Crazy. Yeah. And it's now, so that was a lot of editing. So the book it didn't take that long to write, but the editing process took forever. So, and what happened with this book is I would write whoever I felt like that day, whatever character I was like in the mood to inhabit. And then I ended up with, 700-800 pages of characters who I don't outline, right?
Okay, no, me either.
Yeah. So, but I ended up with like an 800-page manuscript, and everybody was on a different timeline. I mean, it was like a disaster. I never will forget. It was like Rosh Hashanah. We were going to somebody's house for dinner, and my husband had read a draft of the book, and he was like, I had this idea that it would just be like a magical puzzle piece and they would all fall into place and it would be great. And that is just so not what happened. So, I had one person in New York, and then 2 months later, I had another character here. They were like on different planets. So I had to get them all on this. I'll never forget, my husband took a sheet of brown butcher block paper and helped me do a timeline, and it was crazy what I had gotten myself. I really made a mess for myself. So finally we got that all sorted out, and I sent it in to the publishers, and the reception was good. So we decided, who we were going to go with, which was Little Brown, which is fantastic. We love Little Brown, and yay. And then it became we need to cut 400 pages out. And I was like, what? I felt like I needed it all. And then there was the issue of the housekeeper. So there was a lot of editing that went on with this book, more so than I think, it reads pretty seamlessly now, but I guess it was a mess, when I handed it in, but she could see there was potential in it, so we worked a lot getting it cut down. And I think it's also really hard for a writer to lose 300-400 pages, right? Because everything feels so important. And, you only realize afterwards that you're the only one who really misses it, right? I don't know if you've had that experience do you have your plots all worked out before you go in?
Oh gosh, no. So I do it just as I'm moving along. I'm writing a novel right now called The Hotel Nantucket, which, like this book, has a lot of characters.
Right.
Obviously, it's a hotel, so it has an entire staff, and not only staff, but guests. So you have staff and guests, and then sort of the Greek chorus always of Nantucket in the background. So I have all these things going on, and I did not use the metaphor of puzzle pieces, but of mosaic, where like you're placing things, and then when you step back, in theory, it should be this beautiful whole. But to your point, I wrote a novel called Golden Girl that came out this past summer. And when I turned it in, my editor is Judy Klain. She's amazing. I had been with Reagan Arthur for 20 years before, and then Reagan moved to Knopf. So it was my first rodeo with Judy. And I had this, what I've perceived to be hilarious chapter of Vivian Howe, my writer, main character, going to the University of Iowa. And it's all about the workshop and how she gets crucified at workshop. And I'm like, this is basically the best chapter of the entire book. And when I handed it to Judy said, this has to go. The whole thing. And I was devastated. But it was precisely as you say. It was important to me.
Right.
It was important to the novel. And hence it landed on the cutting room floor. And happy coda, as I sent it just a couple days ago to a guy that I was in workshop with at Iowa. I'm like, he's reading the book now. And I'm like, hey, here's the Iowa chapter that got cut. And he greatly appreciates it because he lived it with me. But anyway.
Are they all sort of autobiographical, your characters? Like, is it all a piece of you?
No, I mean, I try not to. It's just, I always say I'm like a satellite dish. So anything that comes into my satellite dish, I'm using.
Yeah.
And I've written a lot of books, so I'm retiring, so I'm really winding down what it is. Okay. So we talked about, so you got it published, and this is your first novel.
No, well, I've written a lot of comedic, they're like illustrated books. The first one was called Bitter with Baggage, Seek Same, which is weird. It was like a weird sleeper bestseller, this book. This was a long time ago, though. I did it when I was pregnant, I think, with my first son. And it was, it just did really, really well. So I thought that's how publishing went. Right. I'm like, it was the most fun I've ever had doing these little books. Literally these little like peep chickens, and they were almost like, it's almost like a 3D collection of cartoons. I did 8 of those books. So I had like, it wasn't my first rodeo in publishing at all, but it was. And then I wrote a young adult novel in 2000, I don't even know, 11 or something, about a group of kind of like teenage celebrities stranded on an island. It sounds really stupid, but it was cute. It was cute. And then this took me a while. And we moved from New York to the Bay Area, and I started doing it. And then, so this is like my first adult novel, this is my first sort of time doing something that was, more serious, but still funny. Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully.
And you say you're working on another book. Can we talk about it?
Yeah, I have. Well, I haven't even handed it in yet, but it's done. It's done. Okay. And I'm going to be handing it in like 2 weeks. So that's exciting. And it's not comedic. So that's scary too. I don't know what that's going to be like. I mean, you want to keep challenging yourself, right? And doing stuff you haven't done. Yeah. And I mean, you've done so many books. I imagine every time. Are you always on Nantucket?
You mean with the books?
Yeah. Like, do you always set it in?
So 24 of the 27 are set on Nantucket. And then I have a series that's set down in the Virgin Islands. Okay. So those 3, and they have like one very slender, infrequently mentioned connection to Nantucket. But for the most part, those are just set in St. John and in the Virgin Islands. And then the rest of them are set on Nantucket. I'm only writing 3 more summer books. That will be 22, 23, and 24. Those will all be set on Nantucket. And then I'm retiring. And
seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yes.
You'll probably come back. You'll end up coming back. Really?
Everyone's like, oh, you're not serious. I am dead serious. I don't want this conversation to turn into something about me, but it was a very intentional decision on my part to just leave while things are good and not sort of, how writers sort of
keep going, right?
They phone it in, and then when things not as good, and then you just sort of sift. And that will not be me. I'm gonna try and maintain my level and then vanish with the night. Okay, Sloane, I want to ask, what do you read? What are you reading? What have you read like in the last 12 months that you've really loved?
So I don't read a lot of current books. I read a lot of old books. I just finished Remains of the Day, which I had read years ago, and I reread it, and I absolutely love that book. Talented Mr. Ripley, I reread again. I do a lot of rereading of books, especially Jean Reese. Do you know her? I'm trying to think of something contemporary I've read that's like, so the new thing I've been doing, I get, reading becomes really complicated for me because I get jealous, when I read something contemporary that's really good. I get like panicky. Instead of being like big hearted about it, I can get all like weird and twisted in my head about it. Like, this is so good. This person's so talented, and then I can like get over that hump and land on like, this is incredible. Oh, I read Luster, which was incredible.
Yes. One of my favorites.
Book. Wasn't that incredible? Her writing is just like crazy good.
One of my last year, loved it. Loved it.
Was that a book club pick you did?
It wasn't. So I tried to pick it for the book club. Somebody else had picked it for book club here. But I read it and recommended it on my Instagram. I mean,
that was really wonderful. And then I read a book called, so what I started to do to get over this weirdness is we have in Berkeley, Oakland, these little neighborhood libraries. Do you guys have those? They're little like houses where people put books.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to get caught up in like what's everybody's reading or this or that or the new hot novel. And I would just start going through when I walk my dog every day and just pulling out a book that looked kind of interesting. I would read the back, and I read a book called Fleischman is in Trouble.
Yes, I loved it.
I loved it. Yeah. So it's kind of it's diffused the pressure for me, and I'm reading books that are great, just kind of landing on. I mean, this is the thing is, I think that's why I really appreciated that you did this for me, because the book came out in 2019, and there's so many books now that come out, and it can be really hard to get traction. And I don't necessarily think it's a meritocracy. It's just what goes, what doesn't. And then you're not the debut author who's like 22 anymore. You know, so. You know, it was great to get this a little like 2 years out. It was just really exciting.
Right.
There are all these like good books that just get kind of buried under and nobody really reads them. They get lost, you know, and it's nice to put a spotlight on them for a minute. You know how hard it is to write a book, right? And it's like a birth, right? And then you know, it has to be the process of doing it that is satisfying enough and not the reception of it. I definitely learned that over my career, you know, so but it was still really nice. I really appreciated it. It was awesome.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, that was exactly my point. Like the point of this book club is, you know, I'm trying not to pick the book. I'm not picking the books that the morning shows pick. I mean, you know, publishing has changed so much. It's like, if you're not an established author already, which I was fortunate enough to be, and how that happened, I'm not even really sure. I mean, it was just like summer after summer after summer, but it was like a whole process.
Yeah.
Just like waiting it out. You know, I have 27 books. I still don't have a movie deal. I still don't have I have stuff in development, but I mean, it could be, who knows? I mean, you know, that's been its own thing. And I'm just telling myself, that's not something I can control. So, but I wanted to pick good books that maybe didn't get the spotlight when they came out.
Right.
And I mean, this did get a starred Kirkus review. I mean, the reviews were beautiful.
It did. That was the thing. I mean, I was optimistic. It got really good critical reviews. So I was sort of like, I don't know how you make it work anymore. Social media is a big part of it. I'm not good at that. You're good at that. You're like, but you already have such a built-in fan base, you know, that
a lot easier. I mean, very, very hard. And I feel like, you know, the people watching this should understand, like, it is so hard to bring attention to your book. And so that's one of the things that I want to do with this book group. And I'm so happy because this is so perfect. And so presumably, like the best case scenario here is that everyone who's watching, who read the book, will talk about it and recommend it and give it to your own that you can do. And then we'll just build a little groundswell. And then Sloane, when your next book comes out, you know, you build on that. And I'm just so happy that I thought, I'm just going to pick this up. And I'm so happy I did.
I'm so glad you did. Thank you. And
really, people on the app, they really, really enjoyed it. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to scoot. Go. And that is, like, the basis for this book, or the meaning behind the title, there's a word for that, is that there are these words. Are they all in German?
Yes.
They're all in German that the German language has that we don't have words for. How did you come up with that concept?
You know, I've always loved, I had my partner on the chicken books that I did was German, the photographer. He did all the photos for me. And he had this very dry humor, and you know how Germans are. And I've always been a little weird with Germans because we're Jewish. And I was like, the accent would be like, just too much. I could, you know, but I really like Germans, as it turns out. They're really, really funny and have this dry humor. And he would say these words sometimes. And I was like, what is that? And when I was in graduate school, we had to learn, you had to speak 2 languages, I think, and then you had to pass 2 written exams. And I know, right? So I did a reading exam in German. And you can kind of, you know, all the words are like these nouns all shoved together, right? So they just, I mean, it's incredible what they do to get so much meaning out of one word that takes us like 2 sentences, right, to put down. And they're so funny, some of them. I mean, I didn't include a lot of them. And there was actually some BuzzFeed thing where they listed all the German words. I mean, there was one that is a face that deserves to be punched, which was like the best word I've ever heard. It's like Backenfashion or something. It's like, I mean, the words are so descriptive and incredible. So I just thought, like, I really want to include this as part of the book. So I made her boyfriend German so that I was able to sort of include that. And, you know, I think a lot of what I was trying to do with the book is get to an emotion underneath the sort of chaos, or what was funny, or what was sort of light. Because I think hopefully there's a tenderness to everything underneath. And I think, you know, some of those words really capture that, you know, like I don't even remember what they are now, but, you know, like.
Well, here's one. So I just opened up to part. Okay, so I'm of course going to butcher this, but Zugzwang, the obligation to make a critical move when one would prefer to do nothing at all, which is all of us all the time, right?
Totally, right?
Time to make a critical move, we would prefer to do nothing. That is called Zugzwang. But what I loved was that those all related in some way to the chapter that was coming.
Right. And that's actually it's a term that comes from playing chess when if you move, you're going to lose, right? So you'd rather just sit and do nothing. Yeah. But we all have to do that. You have to like take a step forward. And the other one I loved, which I'll butcher too, is torsion panic, which is like gate shutting panic, literally, which is like when you get to a point in life and you feel like the best years are kind of behind you and you have like a tiny window to make a change or do something differently. And like, are you going to run through the gate or is it going to shut on you? Right. And of course, there's a darkness to that in like the German history and culture.
Right.
But, I won't go there.
Overall, I would have to say it really, really worked. Okay. So for anyone, please recommend Sloane's book. It has been such a joy. I want you to make sure that you send me your new book so that I can
definitely
blurb it. And thank you for talking with us.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And thanks everybody who joined.